afternoon and welcome to Tetewathá, Partyline Talkshow. I'm your host, Luann Stacy, and today is MCK Friday, and I'm joined in studio by Chief Gina Deer as well as Paul Rice. Welcome to the show.
Hi, nice to be here.
How's it going?
It is very much going.
I assume that.
Yes.
And I'm not being funny. not today. I guess we may as well jump right into the hot topic of today and the last couple of days with regards to the change of mandate for Tetewatha and implications of a change in terms of economic development, portfolios, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess where I would like to start a little bit is basically how this started, a couple of years back, because this didn't just start this week, last month. And you and I have talked a little bit about this.
Actually, I've been mentioning it. I actually mentioned it in my campaign because we had started in the last term. If you look, I brought an article with Kyle DeLille when he became CEO of Tetewatha. One of the things that he had said he would be requesting in his mandate would be to have revenue generation removed and do true economic development. So the discussion started there. As a new CEO, he wanted to make some, substantial changes, and he was hoping that the board, along with him, could work with the Mohawk Council and look at, how they could better service the community, because they were doing a lot of small business and they wanted to do large business. So moving away from that revenue generation, because apparently there was an argument over the years of what their real role was, and they didn't feel that revenue generation was that role.
And revenue generation means MCK, or community revenue generation. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, in the law as it was written originally, revenue generation was large scale community initiatives. And the reasoning for that and why revenue needs to be generated hasn't really changed over the years. And I've alluded to that before, in that, the community is still, for the most part, heavily reliant on federal and provincial funding. And the key to a strong economy and an independent financial future and being able to fund, the various things that are important to this community, then you need to generate revenue and income, and that comes on a project basis.
Okay, so now we're going to fast forward a little bit. In today's Eastern Door, there was a letter written by the current board of directors. And I guess the bottom line, or the essence of the letter, talks about how the community should have been consulted on this change. And I'm also going to ask the question, I know when boards were put in place many years ago, it was mandated to keep arm's length from whether it was community services or the hospital, education, et cetera, et cetera. What makes this different in terms of taking back that responsibility? I know that's two questions, but...
Well, we are looking at a CEO who came to council and asked for change, and we wanted to work jointly. But I can back up even a little more than that, and I'll go back to the Michael Rice situation, right? They had a situation with Michael, and they removed him from the board without consulting with community, and he was voted in, and they still removed him. I was never in agreement with that, and as a matter of fact, I had stated at the board on a few occasions during the meetings that I did not agree. But the board still did what they wanted to do at that point. So since then, Michael had written a letter to council and asked to put the board in trusteeship because he had his concerns. At the time, council had a meeting and decided that they wouldn't do that, but they would work with them, and it would be like an oversight. And since that time, council has been trying to work and better service the community and not have a power struggle. So over time, there have been several incidents that have happened with council, and we all saw the headlines for the lease of the building, the office complex. There's been several, big issues that have come along. And we kept working on the mandate with them jointly so that we could get past these issues and start focusing on what the real needs are for community. And that has been the objective here for council. It's never been to unilaterally do anything. It's been to work jointly. And I have to say, I saw Greg's signature, and I was quite surprised because Greg has been sitting with us. You know, he stepped into the new role at the Tetewathá board as the chair, and Barbara stepped into her role as interim CEO for Kyle, and they started to work with us on this. So we've always tried to continue, even though they've had their own struggles and their own trials. I know things have gone on at their level, and we have been patient and we have been accommodating to bring in their new people to ensure that they took part in this.
So let me ask another question. What do you think about the request that the community should have been notified or should know or be involved in how this takes place?
The community has been notified. As I said, I mean, even during my campaigning speech, that was one of the things that, you know, I wanted to continue to work on the mandate and see it to its completion. And the whole issue with the law was there are processes to amend the law, but there are not processes to repeal the law. And that's what council, you know, has been telling them. It's not finalized. The only process that was finalized, to my knowledge, is the amended.
Will that letter affect the day-to-day operations of Tetewatha?
No, it should not affect the day-to-day operations because the mandate is there, and it's basically what they've been doing all along. And it's really just removing the revenue generation portion. So the organization is functioning very well. We're very happy what we see in the community as far as the new objectives they have. I'll go back as far as the business walk. I took part in that, and several people from council had taken part with Tetewatha, you know, to go to businesses and reach out to them and see what the needs are. So we've been doing this jointly for a very long time on so many levels.
Okay, we'll take a break and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Tetewathá Partyline Talkshow. I'm your host, Len Stacy, and today is MCK Friday, and I'm joined by Chief Gina Deer as well as Paul Rice, and I drew a blank on your job title, so if you could share. And I know you're in a bit of a transition, so if you could share with us, please.
Everybody loves that word transition. I think everybody used that sort of right from the beginning when we were talking about the change in position. But the title of the position is Business and Economic Development Advisor. And as I've spoken, you know, through the various media inquiries, it's really kind of a position that predominantly will support Chief and Council and advise Chief and Council. And, you know, to your question before of what's different now is that, you know, economic development and business development is very much a collaborative sort of initiative now. You know, it's not so much where Tetewatha or even the council would be initiating, you know, these large scale projects using an all eggs in one basket type of approach. So that requires collaboration if you're going to be doing, you know, economic development projects and that kind of thing. And my role will be acting as that sort of mediator, negotiator, collaborator between the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake, Tetewatha, you know, who's pursuing true economic development, the private sector as well, and the community. So, I mean, that's essentially the role in and of itself. And it's not merely, you know, revenue generation. That's important. But if you look around the community, there's a lot of, you know, projects, infrastructure projects, housing projects. You think about the need for, you know, an elders lodge, daycare, even this radio station. You know, K103 was at the same place for the longest time, and this radio station sort of came to be as a result of funding from an economic development fund, you know, the Aboriginal Initiatives Fund. So that in of itself is even like an economic development project. So my role is really going to be, you know, predominantly advising council, working together with these groups in order to see revenue generation in a different way through partnership and agreements and collaborative initiatives, as well as, you know, seeing projects in the community that support economic development, that allow for job creation, and that also have some income generating from them. So
that kind of clears some questions for me, because one of the things was, and I've read this a lot on social media and people questioning things, and one of the issues was, how can we trust council with this given the housing situation? And I've seen it, I've heard it, people are asking, and I guess I'm asking that same question too.
Well, I can personally say that I have full confidence in Paul's new role, and I think the proof is there because MCK is doing better than it ever has, in my opinion, financially. Things are really rolling along, and that's through the initiatives that Paul has been part of, I've been part of, all of council in these decisions to move forward on certain projects, bringing monies in and not just waiting for that dollar from, a federal or provincial level.
Yeah, because we know that that's an issue across the board, no matter what area you're from. Just outside here, we have a lacrosse team fundraising, fundraisers. I think there's 5 or 6 just today for a number of things. So that becomes an issue. Another question related to this is conflict of interest. Is there any type of conflict of interest, and how will that be dealt with?
I'm not sure about what type of conflict of interest you're talking about.
I guess let's use an example. There's a decision to go into a business that maybe the community doesn't want to do, and council thinks it's a great revenue generation. We can use casino because that's been on the table a number of times. And what happens there? Who's the final decision maker? Because there will be a conflict if the community outright says no, but you think it's a great revenue gen, and you have all the financial statements and all of those things that bring it to.
Okay, I thought you meant conflict of interest in a different way.
No, I meant
social acceptability is the I guess modern day term that they're utilizing. And for casino, it's relatively simple because there's been a referendum, right? But in other projects, there's been consultation with community. Yeah. And a lot of the issues that happened around cannabis, I can use that specifically.
We'll use that one as example too. Yeah.
There was a lot of acceptability to go into the manufacturing, and people were happy to look at the medicinal side of doing a cannabis manufacturing, but they were really reserved when it came to the retail and distribution within the territory, right?
Right.
So there was other things that were done to gauge that level, and it's still a pretty close level of acceptance. And again, it's something that we continue to work with community on. We keep looking at different ways to reach out to community. I think with the cannabis, it was pretty successful because there were many ways that, we had looked at that, and making sure that we had a true representation of, the numbers.
Yeah. And I guess the other question back to Paul is in terms of working, how are you going to be working with all the other organizations? Because I'll use both of those topics in terms of businesses, whether it was the casino or there's social impacts. And it wasn't just, right now there's a thing in the community about how many people have access within the community. People are blaming outside people coming in and, looking at taking, just any kind of people just walking around the community where before that wasn't an issue. How is that going to be brought into decisions of what types of businesses will go into?
Okay. I mean, there's a few pieces to that question. But I mean,
I'm on a roll today, just so you know.
I mean, first and foremost, again, in the past, it was kind of, Tetewathá has a project, it's revenue generation. And before that, it was council has a project, that'll be revenue generation. But really, the future is going to be a lot of sort of partnerships, right? Okay. And I don't recommend, council, the administration of council should not be, owning and operating businesses. Our history of success has, constantly been built on partnerships. Finding people that know what they're doing, partnering with them, and then as part of the calculation of what is the value of this venture or what is the benefit of that venture, you then weigh that against, what could the projected or estimated social impacts being, right? So an example that you talked about was more people in the community. Yeah. So if a venture is going to bring, an estimated, 200 more vehicles through the community per, let's say, week, vehicle traffic, can we handle that? How are we going to handle that? And one way to handle it is by adding more resources or revenue. But then there also has to be, how are you going to allocate that money, and how are you going to plan for this sort of influx of people? And, the council is somewhat involved in that, because if you have additional traffic on a highway that involves discussions with the province, right? So you have to discuss certain things with the province. There's more vehicle traffic. You're talking to the MTQ, that kind of thing. And then internally, you have to talk to the PKs and the fire brigade, KSES, etc. And there's very much, there's a template for when you evaluate projects. And we took what Tetewatha was using when they were evaluating their projects, and we've kind of used that and worked with Tetewatha as part of the soon to be fully launched Business and Economic Development Fund, so that, well, this is how much the financials say. This is how much we think it's going to have an impact, positive and socially, and then bring that and present it forward through whatever the decision-making process is going to be. So really, it's about adding up the pros and cons of projects and then bringing them for decision.
Okay, because that to me was important, because it seems like every time we seem to get into something, we're not looking always at the impacts, of certain decisions. And I don't mean always. It happens sometimes, and we have pieces, other people have pieces, and that's what I was trying to get at, because if we're going to make really solid decisions, then the community becomes the benefactors.
And I think that's where the change is, because we are doing those things now. We are looking at the impacts as a whole. And again, cannabis being another one of the examples, because we were consulting with everybody. Actually, I could go back to tobacco. We did that with tobacco.
We could talk about that one too, because
And there was a lot of consulting with community on that. So I think it's the direction we're going in. There's a lot of work that's being done. There's a lot of people behind the scenes looking at trying to develop an actual process to ensure that we reach as many community members as possible. We were looking at tablets going door to door, or having ID numbers where people can come in and maybe vote, simpler ways to get people engaged.
Because I think that was the critical part of this, is all we seen was a decision, a change, but what is the fault? You're not going to start next week, or that you already have a business, that kind of thing, that there's going to be work. So what will be the next step?
Okay, so the change in the Tetewatha mandate was one of a few things that were being worked on. And a lot of it stemmed from the sale of shares in Continent 8. So MCK and Tetewatha were partners, and then there was a negotiation and a sale of shares, with Continent 8. So we liquidated our interest in exchange for, cash and a future cash flow. The Tetewatha mandate, a few months ago, even a year ago, there was sort of a push from the private sector for a business coalition. And then you have the MCK, and now there's a piece missing, right? When you go and you want to do a project, whether it's strictly for profit or whether it's an economic development project such as an elders facility to meet the new needs, you need capital. And what capital means is that you need money. And it's not going to be always, entirely 100% paid in cash. Sometimes you have to finance. You finance your car, you might finance your home or things like that. And there's finance in business as well. But you always need capital. And really what we're trying to do, and we've worked together with Tetewatha over the past several months, call it a year even, on developing what we're calling the Business and Economic Development Fund. Which, currently as it's structured has an investment policy which spells out the criteria for, what you would be investing in, things such as you cannot invest the entire fund into one project. That would be an all eggs in one basket, and that's a significant risk, right? You want to make sure that you have multiple, investments in diversified places, so that you have different income streams and going back to becoming less reliant on the feds and the province. So really the next step is we want to, put together these documents in an organized fashion, put them out to the public, have a call for projects, see what's out there, and really find, the next step is projects.
Because I think that was my next question. How are you going to engage the community, in particular business people? Because sometimes they have business ideas but may not have the wherewithal to get it started or whatever. Are you looking to partner with them as well?
Yes, we are. And that's one of the things that brought us to this point, because people were going to Tetewatha and they were coming to council and saying, well, I didn't quite get the answers I want. There's problems around legislation and we don't have things to help us, do certain types of businesses. And that's why it came to the council table. So we've kind of got involved slowly over time in that fashion while I've been sitting there myself.
And just really, you mentioned that it's very important to keep in mind that there's different, the economy is a very large, complex thing in Kahnawake. I mean, it's very important for the people, for the public institutions, for the private sector, and there's different areas to go. And Tetewatha, in Kyle's vision of pure economic development, has a critical role in that. If somebody wants to get into business and is just starting and they need some guidance, they can go to the private sector, they can go to Tetewatha, and Tetewatha is there to support the economy and to provide service to the private sector in terms of how businesses are starting up, how businesses are expanding. I know there's entrepreneurship, they have business services. So really there's a role there to facilitate new business development. And council has a role to facilitate business as well. There's certain businesses that require something from the MCK. And you've seen that historically before Tetewatha was created, and you've seen it during Tetewatha's existence, and you'll see it in the future of Tetewatha, is that the council, you said arm's length before, it's more of a hand-in-hand type of thing, because you can't be 100% arm's length from business at the MCK. There is a role to be played. Having said that, the MCK is not taking over the economy, taking over Tetewatha, or taking over, the business of Kahnawake. I mean, and that's kind of what I advocate to the council table, is that we have to find a way to work together for the future of the economy and a new way of doing business. And everybody has a role to play. And that capital fund, the Business and Economic Development Capital Fund, when we get to the point of having those projects that'll see real tangible benefits and we need money, that's where you would go.
Okay, my next question is, you have sort of a committee who's in charge, and Gina, you're in charge of external. Is it external?
External,
yeah.
Yes.
So maybe we could talk a little bit about what the role is of this new portfolio that you'll be heading up.
Well, on the external side, I have discussions with Quebec around economic development, and we had one yesterday, as a matter of fact. So
I didn't know that. I just asked the question.
Yes. So we're bringing them back to the table, and we do have an economic development agreement with Quebec that really hasn't gone anywhere for different reasons on both sides, and now we're ready to try and work towards implementing that, because there was somebody from the community that was hired for its implementation, and that was funded through Quebec. So we're going to get rolling on that. And Mike DeLille is the community, rep on economic development. And he'll work along with Frank, with Tetewatha and the board, and attend board meetings and things like that. But we're part of a team, right? So we all play a different role, but we all come together and try and move economic development together. So...
yeah, and I think it's a good mix. I mean, I've worked with Gina and Mike before, and Frank through the by-election is now joined on council, and I hear their different perspectives, and I really think that economic development portfolio team. You asked the question of how's it going to work.
Yes.
Really, that's kind of the central sort of conduit or table or team, I guess that's why it's called a team, would bring these things together and handle what would, economic development items. So projects would go there. Tetewatha, their leadership has a role there. The OCC has a role there. Mm-hmm. The council administration has a role there. It's, again, focusing on the collaborative approach of moving forward and trying to work together to see, not just revenue generation, but real economic development projects move forward within the community.
Do you have any ideas right now of things that you'd like to see, or of that, and one, I'm just going to throw it out there, is people have been talking about organic gardening and greenhouses and things. And, I hear in a lot of different areas, and I still think that would be great, because it would help with our own sustainability as a community, for food security. And just, what's your thoughts on a project like that? Because that's totally different, than other projects that have been proposed.
Yeah, and when people come with a project, we're expecting them to have, all the details of the project. We're not looking for just ideas. We want people to invest a little bit of time and energy into planning it and have a business plan. Paul and I have been sitting on the investment committee. We've had people come forward with different projects. It's we're open to presentations. I mean, the electronic gaming devices is something, that was years in the making also. It had come to the table in different forms, and it wasn't acceptable at that time. But when they came with their business plan and the whole project, it was like all the questions were answered. So we moved forward in that aspect, And again, Paul and myself were part of that. I think over time, again, we're seeing improvement. We're seeing money come in, and we're looking for that independence. And I want to just make mention of Andrew DeLille Sr., because when I started at council, he kind of took me under his wing and told me all about the job and the role and what it entailed. And economic independence was what he always wanted. And he kind of set the tone for what I do now. And that's why I'm always interested in being in economic development. When we had the new roles, they were a little surprised that I got out of, the policing. But that economic independence is important. And not having that handout, and we have to work together. There has to be a collaboration. It's not Dewa's money, it's not MCK's money, it's community's money. So we should be moving all in the same direction. And that's what this whole purpose was, of continuously meeting together and talking about this and what is that future going to look like. Doing the studies, the case studies, the business walk. Council was involved in all of those things, We enjoyed actually doing that. We had a great time. And, you're getting the perspective of the community member and the business owner. We sat in their businesses with them, and looked around and talked about the needs and what they would like to see as far as the future. We all brought that back, and that's the direction we're going.
Okay. On that note, we'll take a break and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Tetewathá Partyline Talk Show. I'm your host, Len Stacy, and today's MCK Friday, and I'm joined by Chief Gina Deere as well as Paul Rice. And again, what did you tell me? I drew a blank again.
Business and Economic Development Advisor.
Advisor. So as an advisor, let me flush out a little bit more in terms of your role. Are you going to have a team of people besides the three chiefs who are going to be working with you? Will there be other people involved with yourself?
Yeah, I mean, as I've stated previously, I'm not a one-man show. I mean, that wouldn't be a reasonable expectation of anybody. But really what we want to take is a sort of a slow-as-you-go approach, I guess I would call it, in that everything's sort of going to function through the portfolio team in conjunction with Tetewatha and the council, as well as, incorporating the private sector and the community as we sort of move forward. In terms of a team, I've been working with One Marquis within the finance department. We hired her a few years ago, and she's still gonna support finance within the administration, but she's also gonna be working with me on this this role. We're also going to be posting for sort of a support position for the portfolio team as well. So keep an eye out for that job posting, and it's going to provide a lot of opportunity. It's not just an administrative position kind of thing, but that position would be involved in the portfolio team to help sort of get it off the ground. So if you're really looking to develop something new and interesting, keep an eye out for that. And that's kind of the core of the team, along with the portfolio chiefs and reps from Dewa, et cetera. But the biggest difference, I think, is that when you have a project, and we're not going to be afraid to go and find the people that have the experience, have the expertise, or have the knowledge in order to advise, I guess, the advisor and advise the decision makers kind of thing on what to do, right? So use the example of, a greenhouse and, food security and food sovereignty is a huge thing.
It's big.
Economically for the community. I think it could be, very big. But I just started a garden this year and it's not doing very well. I mean, the plants are supposed to be green. I gotta hook you up with
two of the best garden people I know, Gary Vova and Stephen McCumber. My garden is absolutely beautiful. I gotta say it.
Good to hear.
I will heed that advice after this. But I mean, I have a tree in my garden, and I'm pretty sure that's not supposed to be there.
No, it's not.
So essentially, and using your case before, somebody has an idea. In order to move forward with a larger project, you need a plan. So the idea turns into a plan, and the plan is informed from various resources, and then you have that plan vetted by somebody who's independent. You know, we find someone who's independent to look at the plan, tell us, what do you think? Can this work? What do you think the risks are? What are the returns? Do you believe the assumptions that are in there? To make it sort of a complete package for the decision to be made. So we are going to be using additional resources, putting, you know, a small budget together and that kind of thing, in order to move this initiative forward.
And I guess what that answers for me as well is how you're going to engage the community and bring the community in, because, you know, there are a number of people who have a little more expertise probably than any of us that are sitting here, to be honest, when it comes to greenhouse, when it comes to that. There's a lot of work. Could it generate jobs? Yes, it could. Could it, you know, and explore that a little bit further, because I guess sometimes the community has felt like we're going in one direction. It's always going to be tobacco, alcohol, whatever. But there are a number of other things. And I'm going to go back a long time ago. I was about 18 years old. And this issue of economic development was at one of the council meetings. And at the time, there were probably about 300 people in the hall. That's how big one council at the time. And they were talking about economic development ideas. And I remember someone talking about a tax-free zone mall and, you know, going that way. That was over 35, almost 40 years ago when that was up. What, you know, people start throwing, it wasn't good. It was now I think of all the revenue, all the jobs, et cetera, et cetera. It wasn't big one splash kind of money, but in the long term, over 35 years, it could have created a lot of jobs and probably have been a successful business venture. And that was actually proposed by the late Frosty Deer. And I remember thinking, man, that was a great idea, you know, because again, it was something that could have been, but, you know, there were other people that wanted the quick fix, fast money. And I guess when we think of these kinds of things, when we think of economic development, those are the kinds of things that are in the community's mind. And I think asking these questions reassures that they're open. You know, it's not just going to be the quick fix kind of money.
Yeah, and it's very important. And again, it's not a criticism of how the community's economy or business has developed up until now. But the reality is, to support and have a strong economy, you can't be overly reliant on one or two or three things. You have to have that diversity, and you have to have different opportunities and ventures, you know, as well as, you know, workforce and that type of thing. I mean, it's very complex, and it's really not as simple as revenue generation as it's come to be known by, right? So I think that's a good point that you brought up, is we want to be able to look at some of these forward-looking things. We want to be able to, you know, see these opportunities and be able to participate in them. And we don't want to look back, you know, 20 years from now and say, well, what were we doing? What did we do? We missed all these opportunities, and we're sort of back in the same place that we were, you know, 20 years ago. And that's kind of the concept behind, you know, taking the money that we got from Continent 8, preserving it in a fund, collaborating with Tetewatha and having sort of equal representation over the oversight of that fund, having rules of how to invest it. And then now we're in the phase of informing people of how we intend to do that, and then seeking projects to diversify the economy and to get into industries that maybe, you know, we had ignored in the past. So
yeah, and I just brought that one because it just stayed clear in my mind, and I often look back, you know, why wasn't it at the time? And, you know, people had different perspective, different idea of what economic development is, and I think that's a critical piece to this.
And no quick fix, you know, like we're not looking for that here. You know, we are stable financially. We're, you know, doing well. What we're looking for is the longevity of projects, right? We want people to have employment long term. And, you know, that's where the collaboration also comes in with Tetewatha, because if there's going to be a need for a specific type of job training, well, then there's, you know, the collaboration. And the electronic gaming devices is another example, because when they were getting established, they had the job fair, right? They worked with Tetewatha to put all of that together and try and, you know, employ people within the community before looking external.
And that's always a big issue, you know, is employment. You hear that all the time, or training programs, you know, to support people who are new coming out of CEGEP and university. You know, if you think back not so long ago, it was the push CEGEP university. Then all of a sudden the trades took a dive in terms of not having enough workers. So now the trades are back up. But I guess my thought is that we need everybody. You need, you know, and this one type answer for everything is not going to work.
No.
Not for long term, I don't think. I don't know, you know.
Definitely. And there's, like I said, there's been a lot of work been put into this, the new mandate, as well as the Business and Economic Development Fund. So we're in the process of doing the implementation plan, and we're hoping for a smooth transition between the two and continuous collaboration. It doesn't end once the implementation is complete, you know?
Yeah. Another question with regards to, since this is revenue generating, how will it be decided how funds will be utilized within the community? What becomes the priorities? Will the community have an input for that? Will, you know, has there been any kind of thought on that?
Well, I think a lot of the times that when something could be controversial, that's when we would engage community at those times, you know. And there's some things that, you know, are pretty cut and dry, and there's things that are not. So that's going to be at the discretion of, you know, the advisor and counsel. And
well, I'm certainly not going to be deciding that.
But you're going to be bringing all of that forward.
No,
you
but
know,
again, this
weighing.
is another piece, because the community, and you know, we got to go back to, we need to have checks and balances. The communities needs to have a say. How is the community going to benefit? You know that, and to me, I hear that all the time. That's one of the biggest criticism. How does the community benefit?
Well, we've kind of created, and I'll talk about the past, and then I'll talk a little bit about the present and then the future. So, you know, Council and Tetewathá had their investment in Continent 8. So Continent 8 funded the community through dividend payments, and those payments were split between the Council and Tetewathá. Tetewath's role was to invest those into future business, and, you know, their main venture was the wind farm project, which is still slated to go forward despite some delays. And that's how the funds were spent from that sort of partnership that we had. Then Mohawk Online was the next, you know, big successful partnership that we've had, and the dollars for that are dedicated to socioeconomic initiatives and programs. And essentially, we've committed that the dollars from there will go to programs, initiatives that do not receive federal or provincial funding, and we've already allocated those, you know, within, you know, I'm talking like I'm still the EFO, but previously we had allocated those, you know, language and training,
Paul.
transition, sports and recreation, you know, all of the areas that the feds and the province don't fund. So generally, that's kind of the approach. And with the EGD project, it's kind of the same thing, right? And the difference is the EGD project, you know, there was none of those had a financial investment from the council. They all had a very good financial return, but the EGD project was local, right? So that project also had, you know, the job benefits, the spin-offs, etc. Now, with the money that we got from Continent 8, we have the Business and Economic Development Fund that will generate more money, right? So even if you're just earning a little bit of interest, you're generating more money and you're not spending it. But we also created quite, you know, collaboratively with Tetewathá, the Community Initiatives Fund. So the proceeds from the sale and the money that flows through the Community Initiatives Fund to fund grassroots initiatives came from the very first most successful business venture that council had. And now you see that money having, you know, a direct impact through now the second round of funding. And the objective in the long run is you have the Business and Economic Development Fund generating income through various projects and initiatives, and then every year putting a little bit more into the Community Initiative Fund, and then the Community Initiative Fund puts, you know, their money into community projects that are sourced, you know, directly from the groups and the individuals. So despite, you know, all the other ways that money could be allocated, you still have that one place where it's going to go. And, you know, I'm not too involved in the Community Initiatives Fund, but from what I've seen, it's been very successful, and people are, you know, pleased with how the money is being allocated. And that's kind of what we want to replicate in terms of process with the Business and Economic Development Fund. Call for projects, submit your projects, we find the partnerships, and then the community initiative side is call for, you know, grassroots initiatives, call for not-profit projects, call for things that'll have a socioeconomic benefit, and then fund them through that. So.
And I want to make a point about the Community Initiatives Fund. That came from the community. They said, from that sale, what are you doing with the money? And we would like to see something for community. And that fund was created in response to community's request.
Yeah, because I think part of it is that's what people want to know. How am I going to benefit?
Yeah.
as an individual, as a community. And we know Community Initiative Fund funded lots of projects, some sports, some recreation, some equipment, enhancement in the education sector. I know they're trying to help people with fundraising. So there are spin-offs to the projects. I have them on the air quite a few times during the year because I know they fund a lot of different things and help different groups.
And for myself, working on economic development, revenue generation, it's really important that the everyday person has a benefit. It needs to reach them. I'm really against it going into the big pot. I'd like to see it utilized for something specific so that the everyday person is impacted.
Because that's been the biggest complaint from the community. It goes to a big pot and who knows where it goes and then who decides that. And this is where people get their backs all up and it's not clear. We'll read the financial statements. Not everybody can read financial statements or have that skill to be able to say, well, what does that mean? Right. The everyday person wants to know, how is it going to benefit me or benefit the community? Bottom line. And that's why I asked the question.
Yeah. And the Business and Economic Development Fund and the decision to not spend the proceeds from the Continent 8 sale was based, predominantly on that. We didn't want to look back 20 years and sort of what happened to that the money that we got from the sale. Oh, well, we spent it all. Right? It's a bit like the couple that wins the lottery and then they go broke and then they win the lottery again and they still go broke for the second time. What happened?
And you didn't learn from it. And I think sometimes that's the biggest issue here. What are you learning from what we did in the past? Not getting stuck on it, being able to move on in the present and then to develop a future that we become sustainable as a community in all aspects, not just economic development.
And the goal of that Business and Economic Development Fund predominantly is to invest the funds. So to earn interest or to earn a return on the money until we find projects that are deemed suitable. And those projects are investments, whether it's in a partnership or a business, or, we're looking at something more economically driven. Like I said, the expansion of the elders, because we know in the future there's going to be a need for space, right? Or it's development of infrastructure, a large infrastructure area that could support economic development. We know we have the returned lands. What are we going to do with those? That kind of thing. So really that's where that capital is going to be allocated, to invest in the future of the community instead of just spending it. So.
Yeah, and I think that's critical because I'm not sure if everybody in the community understands that. What they see, it's going to go into a pot and that's going to be it and going to be gone.
It hasn't here. Yeah.
And that's a lot of the questions basically that I saw out in the community. Any other things? We have about a minute left. Anything else you want to share with the community on this?
On this?
Yeah.
No, I'm done.
Paul?
If you have anything?
No, I think I've said it pretty much to everybody. I mean, I'm really excited about this change in my role, and I really want to move forward, and I'm looking forward to being able to contribute to the future of the economy of this community. And like I said, I really think it's project driven. I want to see some really impactful projects here within the community that generate income, that generate jobs, that support the economy, and the future of the people that live within it. So.
Now, we answered some questions, but if the community has other questions, can they approach you guys?
Absolutely.
Because I think that's important to feel that there's an open thing, if they have concerns.
Yeah, definitely on an individual basis. For sure, you can approach me. And then for the Business and Economic Development Fund, we'll be launching some stuff online and also providing more information to the community. So if you have a project or you have a potential idea in mind, you'll have an official way of communicating that as well. So.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time. Gina, do you have something else? You got
There's
that
just
look.
One
you got
thing.
that look.
Yes, and it's not related to this. I just want to, relate to the community that there's been some break-ins in Joe.
Yes.
And we had a meeting this week with Assistant Chief Peacekeeper Jody Daibo, the caretakers, and Tara McCumber. There have been 5 break-ins, 3 reported to date, I understand. So there's not 22, there's not 15, it's been 5. There's been a lot of rumor in the community, so I just wanted to let them know. Measures are being taken. The peacekeepers will be in Joe for the rest of the peak season.
Okay.
And that'll be during the weekends, though. So during the week, the caretakers are going to look at how they can maybe do some shifts or patrolling in different, areas and times and stuff. So
Yeah. Thank you, Chief Gina Deere and Paul Rice, for your time.